Hi everyone, good afternoon to one and all. I am Mayur Sachdeva, and I head this sales team at Lawseco. Today I have a very interesting topic which I grabbed as soon as it came to my notice about the public policy. It's interesting to me because I hardly know things about it, and it's going to be a learning experience for myself too. Learning along with Mr. Aditya Rao. And I would now like Mr. Rao to introduce himself and then take it forward.
Uh, a very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Mayur and team, for having me here. It's always a pleasure to interact with Lawseco team, which is with its superb commitment to help further engagement with the community, typically younger colleagues in the profession, and most importantly, law students. I'll keep my introduction very short and relevant to the topic that we're discussing. I was very enthused that Lawseco is looking to probe further in this area that I would not even regard as up and coming anymore. Public policy and law is now an established practice in India. A bit about myself. I started out with a heavy interest in litigation and dispute resolution during my internship days at law school. Moved on to do a whole host of corporate internships as well. And finally, I landed up working with one good lady as an intern in Luthra and Luthra, who was working on something very interesting on evolving policy around TRIPS and how it impacts the intellectual property regime in India. And I got sucked into that work as an intern. And for the brief period that I was there, I really looked at it and I said, hey, this is something that is very impactful, and allured me towards probing into this a lot much more. I did not know at that point in time that lawyers could actually discharge this function, and governments and private sector alike was looking for professionals to discharge this function. I moved on from there and joined the public policy team, which was just getting formally established at the Amarchand Mangaldas Sureshesh Law Firm as it was back then. And I had a wonderful experience. Ostensibly, the team also stayed with me, and I was given a PPO when I came on board. Throughout my years as a policy and regulatory affairs lawyer at Amarchand, I worked with government as clients, public sector organizations as clients, and also private sector participants, which meant anything from industry associations to companies to even private equity firms. Um, Post that, after a 5.5 year stint at Amarchand, I moved out and worked with the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, which is a think tank by Ministry of Corporate Affairs, looking at legislative drafting and policy drafting, amongst other things. And I also got engaged with my erstwhile partner at Amarchand, and we set up under Sohan's leadership PLR Chambers, which is a law firm that looks exclusively at policy, law, and regulation, and completely focused on public policy. If I was to describe myself in a sentence, I would say um, I'm a lawyer with 12 years of heavy engagement in the public policy space. Over to you, Mayur.
Superb. That's a great introduction to yourself. But how has been the journey like? Like, how did you thought of getting into such a niche kind of area, which was yet unexplored at that point of time when you started off? I mean, I remember you are one of the first to get this into our system. I mean, get into this public policy lawyering and stuff. So, how did you find the motivation to get into all of this?
Well, the motivation for me, I think I will go back to something that I had mentioned, right, which is my brief internship at Luthra with the lady partner then, who was looking at IP, and for me, really, the motivation was um, seeing how this is impactful work, and it was intellectually very, very rewarding. And it was also something where there was never a dull moment. It required for me to, yes, have my foundational skills as a lawyer, so legal research, knowing interpretation of statutes, but it also required for me to go beyond that and truly look at the balance of convenience that government has to go through in terms of balancing the interests of all stakeholders. And I thought that was something that was very, very interesting, and for professionals to step up in that space, to me was very enthusing. So on an interest side, I think unique nature of work and the impact it makes, I thought was far, far above anything else that I had done. Of course, my first love then was litigation, and that can be very empowering as well. And I thought, if not more, this is a closer equal cousin of doing that. So that's at a personal level. And from a professional growth level, I honestly saw the vacuum, what you precisely said, right? Which is, I saw the vacuum in the industry and the growing demand. We should not forget that we were at that point of time looking at a third wave of liberalization. And a lot of sectors were being opened up, a lot of foreign exchange policy and sectoral regulation was being changed. The way government was acting, courtesy RTI, had also changed. So they had to proactively engage. Companies had to think not just a couple of quarters down the line, but long term, and proactively engage with the government. And to me, that meant, and I'm glad that got validated several years later now, with the fact that professionally, I thought this is a great space to be in, and India was very much, Delhi was very much on its way to become a Brussels, or a London, or Washington DC, in terms of policy making.
That's great. Okay, and so how would you define the whole kind of work that you are doing right now over the years? How would you define it, like for our viewers, for me, maybe?
Yeah, happy to do that. If I was to put buckets of how I would define the work, I think we deliberately named the firm PLR by design in that fashion. So you have public policy engagement, which I said requires you to do deep embedded legal as well as additional research on economics, on social political impact, on sometimes even cultural issues, and really layer it and mesh it, and that's really policy drafting, analysis, and so on. That forms a very, very heady part of what you have to do on a day in day out basis. The second part is the culmination of all of this process, is legislative drafting, which is something that we do on a day in day out basis with state governments, with central government. And that means, I'm going to put this out for viewers, especially law students, that the role for lawyers now in legislative drafting and the inclination of government to actually have on board experts who are committed to particular fields as lawyers to help them in drafting has drastically changed. And that has completely opened the floodgates for this kind of practice. You have think tanks who have executed really, really good work on legislative drafting. My firm looked at the Motor Vehicle Amendment Act as the one recent legislative work that I would say has seen its day in Parliament and come out. And I think that forms a very, very heady part of what you do. But it's not just the act; it's also the rules, the regulations. The devil lies in the details. And the third part, as a policy lawyer, that you're really required to do is necessarily look at regulatory advice. And I would say this is beyond desk advisory. This is where your engagement and interaction and experience in a particular sector makes it very helpful for you to be able to transliterate for all all in the ecosystem on what is the impact of a particular policy, on how to go about a particular process and assist clients in that process. So broadly, this is what it entails.
Super. That's insightful. So, what does one need to do to make a career in public policy after graduation in law?
Well, I think firstly, I would say before you graduate, uh, if it's something that interests you, please do take out time to get a first-hand feel in terms of doing a couple of internships on the policy space. Not too many. I know these slots are very coveted. They only happen twice or thrice a year for law students, and the offset on the other side is a well-paying tier one corporate job. And that's not to say tier one corporate law firms also have public policy and legislative drafting departments, by the way. However, I would say post graduation, I think one needs to actively start working with organizations that are engaged in public policy. A very good segue would be for you to see if you can get into some of the programs by Niti Aayog, some of the programs by various ministries. In fact, look, the Ministry of Law itself puts out various positions from time and time out for again to be able to get you a very, very good and heady exposure and understanding of which part and which segment of public policy law really attracts you, both from the skill sets that I described to you in terms of functions, as well as the sector. There are a lot of people who say, I'm only and only interested in technology law. And therefore, the cusp between technology law and how it's pushing the boundaries of existing regulation versus the operation is what interests me. And that can be in the form of, right aggregation. It can be in the form of messaging. It can be in the form of payments. So, that really depends on you. But I think for majority of law students, my post-graduation, my heady advice would be to go and actually work with think tanks, with organizations, directly work with institutes and ministries. And one of the interesting avenues that has again opened up in the last half a decade or so is to work with parliamentarians' offices. So you have now programs started by PRS, and they did wonderful work, fellowships. It's called the LAMP Fellowship, and you have a couple of more where you, as a lawyer, are taken under the umbrella of the office of a particular parliamentarian, and you get to really work with them on a day in, day out basis on legislative and policy items. That to me is probably the best crash course for someone who is interested or wants to figure out the level of their keenness for this space.
That's great. Okay, and I mean, does one need to pursue a master's to be like in public policy? If I mean,
Are you asking in terms of is a master's a must, or does a master actually further your chances?
right.
Okay, I'll answer both.
Yeah.
I for one, full disclosure, don't have a master's as yet, neither in law nor in public policy, and LLM or MPP as we call it are both fairly good ways for you to get the right credentials and for organizations to take note. More importantly, the Masters in Public Policy program allows you and empowers you with the right set of tools. So whether we like it or not, law school pedagogy is anyways very intense in the 5 years or 3 years. And the kind of stuff that we end up learning on economics and pol science and basically even interpretation of statutes and how the art of policy making is very, very little. I think an MPP serves as a very, very good platform for you to necessarily learn about how my macroeconomic and microeconomic planning is done. What is the kind of stakes that regulators deal with? How do they arrive at a solution of a problem? How do they do right stakeholder consultation? And I think that really, really helps you. So one, would a MPP or a LLM better your chances in the public policy space? I would say the MPP would probably hold you in much higher stead as compared to a LLM. Having said that, if you were looking to, given my example of technology law, right? If you were looking to just focus on public policy and technology law and your mind is made up, then a master's in law looking at technology laws from an institute that is par excellence and known as such for that is obviously a really, really good booster. If you were interested in intellectual property laws, and my knowledge is obviously perhaps outdated now of institutions and their rankings, but George Washington in the US, MIPLC in Munich are stellar institutes who, through the course of their master's degree, also expose you to a lot of the policy trends and policy analysis and allow you to work with the regulators in projects as well. It betters your chances of a job for sure, but that is not to say that this is a prerequisite. One thing that I would advise all the viewers is to necessarily, and I'm repeating this and I would probably do that many times over, is to really find their bearing before they go on to a journey of both in the order of priority, time and money, expending that to pursue a degree abroad or in India. Because MPP takes 2 years typically, and a master's abroad will typically take you a year. So that those are 11 and 22 very critical months of your life. So I would suggest put a couple of years under your belt and then go in. And you would see this being validated by, if you ask people who've actually been to master's courses and MPP courses abroad, LLM and MPP alike, their peers would be people who would have spent 5 years working with a firm or as a solicitor or in a corporation somewhere or in a think tank or at a senator's office, and then they have come in because that exposure gives you a deep-seated understanding and ability to uptake on the course even better. And when you walk in as an experienced professional, of course, your ability to expand your networks, right, in terms of knowing similarly placed professionals across the globe, which can be very, very valuable as you grow up in a hierarchy and responsibility in what you're executing, is immaculate then.
Got so you, are there any more institutions that you would like to tell us about, like from where these MPP? I'm sure, you have, as you clarified, that you did not go for a master's or an MPP, but then surely it helps somewhere down the line, right? But only after certain period of experience, right? So what could be the institutions to eye for, like in India or in abroad, like for a person trying to get into the field?
So I think National Law School, again, my knowledge is not up to date on the subject of the institutions that offer these courses and the credibility thereof. But National Law School Bangalore, I know for as a matter of fact, has an MPP course. I have interacted with and worked with some of the alumni from that course, and I can only say good things about that. There are several other institutions. I believe Ashoka University also has a MPP-like course or an MPP course itself. They're fairly good. Ashoka, of course, has a very, very strong liberal arts background, so that helps when you're sitting in a campus where people are talking about everything from economics to politics, general governance, economy, and I think. Abroad, I think you obviously have Columbia, the CEPA program, which is very, very good. You have the Harvard Kennedy School of Governance. You have, I think, I don't know if I'll be able to pronounce it right, but you have the school in Singapore, uh, which is with NUS, and they have an amazing program as well that helps you. You have courses in EU, slightly more difficult to get into, and obviously depending on which country the institution is placed, sometimes the medium of instruction can also be in a language which is other than English, so that makes it difficult. But here, there are more than enough choices available, and the Indian institutes are really really good, um, as has been validated by my experience of working with some of the alumni from at least the NLS MPP course.
Right. So does being a law student makes you preferable for the policy jobs?
It has now, and it's interesting you've asked this question because it also dovetails with how this profession has evolved. Policy making in a closed economy, in an opaque, in a space where government was relatively opaque or was not obligated to disclose as much as it discloses today or follow the transparent process as much as it is obligated today, meant that policy very often was confused and restricted to liaison, right? PR, liaisoning, and these were common words that were thrown around. And you therefore did not have a structured manner in which lawyers were engaging on public policy. Not that it did not happen, of course it did, but there was no structured fashion. In came in the era of reforms, came in greater levels of corporate governance, came in the need for companies to move about this in a structured and formal manner, requiring the right set of partners as advisors, and therefore you had the need for lawyers. So yes, you do compete. In short, I would say you do end up competing with people who've done their MPP and may not be lawyers for similar positions, but there is a growing preference for lawyers in the public policy seat, and position. And there's a reason for that, because your training as a lawyer allows you to be able to transliterate what the company is asking for or what the government is asking for, any client is asking for, as a solution or an outcome or the issue or the statement that they're giving in terms of law. So the ability to carry that reform becomes much more easier with your training as a lawyer. You know exactly how allocation of business rules allow for which ministry is tasked with a particular matter. Your understanding of the legal space allows you to know where court intervention can happen, where the gaps lie, and what is the best method. So, and this has been validated across the globe, where you've seen an increasing role for lawyers in the public policy space. And as our economy grows and as it keeps on maturing even more and more, you would only see this becoming, bellowing further and further. Yeah.
Super. So that actually, I mean, you answered, like, if the next question that I had was, where do lawyers fit into this public policy side? You correctly said a few things. Would you like to elaborate more, like, about?
Absolutely. So I probably did not articulate this well enough. So initially there was a large number of professionals who were in the PR or media space, or general consulting space, coming from a management background. Sometimes not even that, sitting as policy advisors to government, to one and all. I think that still exists. So as a policy lawyer, you may have people coming in from PR, media, or a general analyst background, competing neck to neck with you for a particular position. But I sincerely believe, and obviously my view is biased as a lawyer, that lawyers have an edge over everybody else in this space, all things kept equal, because your training as a lawyer, as I said, allows you to be able to very quickly and in a decisive manner arrive at the right strategy of reform or the right formulation, and you don't need to seek outside help for doing that.
Super. Okay. And what has been the COVID impact on this space? Like, I mean, how has is it evolved I mean, in a way, or is it like there's a setback? Like, how has things been like on this space? What are your thoughts?
If you're talking from the perspective of um, there are actually two things here. One is policy reform per se,
Mhm.
has it stalled or has it gotten accelerated in the COVID space? Uh, to that, I would say yes. Whether we like it or not, moments of crisis, unfortunately, for most governments across the world, and let's not criticize our own government, they do a stellar job at most things considering the mass and scale. Um, these unplanned points of intervention actually become very good pivots for the government and businesses and citizens to take a good look at existing set of policies and put out changes. So I would say it's been a very, very active time in terms of policy formulation, at least at the government level, and certainly as a natural consequence of all the churn that's happening across the world, and India is not insulated to that. Indian companies are also very proactively looking and reevaluating their policy stances. You know, and there are a lot of good ideas that are coming to the fore from a policy perspective. So that's to say the process has never been in stalemate, but it's only now been accelerated further. Um, Also, I don't think policy is going to be in a stalemate, generally speaking, because um we're a very, very interesting sandbox as a country. If you were to look at this from the perspective of the kind of demographics that India represents, and the diversity that India represents. Take any one measure and try and plot it across. You will find some levels of uniformity, but it will be a very, very diverse market. So we're also becoming a bit of a sandbox for almost every company, every corporation, uh, to reinvent the way that they do business, or actually in cases that, as we are finding out now, uh, undertake businesses here, mature it out, and then take it to other markets, because India is such a great market to be in, right? And therefore, I think there's going to be a constant push on policy reform across the board. We as a set of people are also evolving. So you see that in our changes in, say, inheritance laws. You're seeing changes in governance laws. I'm talking about not just at the central level, even at the state level. You're looking at electronic delivery of PDS and other services. To give you an example of something that was never done before, now you have pensioners being able to get their life certificate, which to those unknown, once you retire from the government and you're entitled to a pension, once a year you have to go to your bank with the details and tell them that I'm alive, and you get a life certificate, and your pension starts to come resume normally. Um, the government of India used, with the assistance of states, amazing interventions, deploying Department of Posts, looking at their POSes, on now doing life certificates, sitting with senior citizens, sitting and in the comfort and safety of their homes. And that's the prime example of, and it took a lot of changes, legally, organizationally, for the government to make it happen, but they did. So policy evolution, I think, in India is only going to get further and further accelerated. And as most consulting firms would tell you, India and Africa are today some of the largest opportunities. And I'm not comparing India as a market to Africa as a market, because Africa is huge and is ripe for development. But India is on everybody's sides. There's a reason why suddenly you see the Southeast Asia headquarters of most companies is now coming into India and not sitting out of an office in Dubai or Singapore or Hong Kong. The feet on the street and the brain's trust is now getting accumulated in India. So I think from that perspective, public policy has a very, very good runway.
Super. So, I mean, yes, of course, the public policy is focused on people's problems and all those things. But how can, I mean, in your view, in your personal opinion, I mean, how can this be used in a way to control the pandemic situation and, I mean, to get back things to normal? Like, how can public policy play an important role?
So I don't think there's one segment or sector or section of professionals that can work towards something so big um, singularly, but it certainly has a role to play in the way that you've looked at now. Recasting. You've just seen it in the labor codes, right? You kind of recasted some of the welfare and reforms that are happening, the way obligations are flowing out. I think there's a lot of good conversation happening today on public policy interventions that need to be made, uh, obviously sort of exasperated by the COVID situation.
Mhm.
And I think public policy's professionals' greatest contribution would be to assist in with an even more greater vigor in good policy making to allow for better recovery of businesses and the economy. I think that would be the single largest contributor, and I think everybody who's there is trying to do a bang on job in trying to get that across.
Great. So basically, I mean, my last question here would be that uh, is it like, I mean, a big policy is drawn out of some small policies across the globe, maybe across the country or demographics, whatever. But is it like, I mean, small policies are picked up to create one big public policy, or how is it like?
So when you're referring to a policy, that's usually an intent statement of the regulator, ministry, or body concerned,
Mhm.
and that translates into law. As we all know, a policy by itself is just a guidance document. What will determine the substantive rights and obligations is going to be the law itself.
Yeah.
And both of them, as you ask, can be taught as 101 in law school, right?
Mhm.
That law is the collective consensus of of the society and their needs, and that sort of starts to turn into law. So, in that sense, I would say sometimes even the smallest of things can necessarily lead to a policy reformulation.
Mm.
And the modus that you asked, which is, do you look at what's happening around the globe? Yes, any healthy policy making or legislative drafting exercise requires for you to look at what's happening around the globe, which is why your game on interpretation of statutes as a lawyer and law student and comparative law needs to be absolutely stellar. And there's good reason for that. You can't anymore regulate in an axiom. You have to look at what's happening across the globe. You have to learn from experiences of other countries if you are going to be willing to make actual positive policy changes. And I think that's a step that India has taken very, very consciously for a very, very long time. Sure, sometimes you can say that you've kind of followed the lead of another country, and it's a or this policy is a copy paste job, or that policy is a copy paste job. um, I think at the end of the day, when you start looking at businesses which are truly global, which work in a bit of a uniform fashion, and their impact is also conditioned towards only a set of constituents, you may find similarity in the way that they are regulated. It's not too far out. The instruments may change, but the substantive nature of regulation may actually be similar, right? Because it's the nature of what you're trying to regulate.
Okay. And so, I mean, what would be, as lawyers, I mean, we are always looking at landmarks. So, what would be, in your knowledge, be the landmarks in these fields? I'm assuming like any policy or drafting is again in itself a landmark only, but then still there'll be some impacts like from where it all. To put it, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, so I would say if I was to look at landmark moments for policy and law and engagement of policy and law, I would say um, it would start right from instruments of transparency on right to information, a catena of judgments that required for greater consultation by the government with stakeholders while drafting laws and making amendment to laws. Um, I think that sort of brought in the greater engagement and gave the largest customer that there is, which is the government, a flavor of what this has to offer. Till then, it was a very closed door exercise, not necessarily completely opaque, but a little less transparent than where it should be. So I would say that those were landmarks. And in terms of other statutes, I can go on rambling about so much changes that have happened since 2007, since I set my sights on actively looking at this from law school. And you would see, I would say there are very, very big moments. You have the Sri Krishna Committee report that came out. You have, you had the FinTech regulation report that came out. You have the national health policy that's national digital health policy that's coming out. You have, for those who are technology enthusiasts, you have drone regulations that have come out, and each of them actually impacts our life in a very, very different way. So I would say these have been very, very hallmark moments. But if you were to ask me single biggest changes, I would say it's the framework with which the consultation used to happen. The moment that changed, that really pushed this process forward. And of course, this should not go unaddressed, as I think the demand for ethical policy making and ethical policy assistance also rose up with this transparency and the recent amendments to Prevention of Corruption Act, the guidelines that were issued, the kind of probity that has now been put out in the entire process obviously helps for regulated professionals to come into this space. And which is why there's suddenly a great surge as compared to the yesteryears on the demands for having a lawyer in the public policy role.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, just as instance, like if you were to counsel somebody who is enthusiastic about like getting into the policy lawyering and things like that, so what would be an ideal roadmap, and what would be like the barriers?
Okay, I'm
Because
probably
you've done that, so
I'm probably going to say this, that and it may sound a little ideological, but I think everybody has their own journey, and that's a precise reason why I described mine. And I think what I would say is a must is for you to have. It's no different from any other profession or vertical in law. You need to have a constant drive and yearning for policy reform, and that should give you the kind of satiation or high in terms of your work product. Um, if I have to counsel someone to say how would you go about this, I would say firstly focus on in law school on figuring out which sectors interest you, focus on interpretation of statutes, focus on administrative law, focus on comparative laws. These are often subjects that don't generally find the spotlight, but they are pretty much the Magna Carta if you want to be looking at the policy space. Then I would, as I said previously, I would say for someone to try and dabble in working with a parliamentarian or a think tank or an organization get a heady first-hand experience of what this involves. And from there, I think the path is then open for all sorts of avenues. You could jump onto a company, you could work with the parliamentarian on a formal basis. I know of a whole host of people who went in as fellows or legislative assistants to parliamentarians, who the parliamentarians ultimately took on their own roles. They really, again, they saw the value that these people could contribute as professionals to the performance of the parliamentarian, and which is really, really great. So my advice would be, most importantly, get to learning and being exposed to every tool that there is in the policy making space. So that means legislative drafting, that means looking at policy formulation, that means understanding a heady understanding of the parliamentary and the bill passage process and how the government works, and all of that would come to the fore in your early years. Um, you know, Unfortunately, there's no, to the best of my knowledge, there's no formal credit course on public policy in law schools currently. We have, as a firm and as individuals, gone to select law schools, select because they had the appetite and it sort of coincided with the time that we had. We would love to do this much more. To do a limited credit course for interested students on public policy making in India, and we actually it's actually the need of the hour. If you were to really help law students who are keen on this subject, you need to have a full credit course with the right set of exercises, like you have in many jurisdictions across the world, to come in.
Super. So, I mean, how drafting plays a role, like, I mean, and how important is it? Like, I mean, of course, drafting is supposed to be bread and butter for a lawyer and a law student, both of them being equally there. But how does it plays the picture? Because from what I understand in the public policy sector, there's a lot of research work involved. So how do one go about drafting, like as a skill?
Oh, it's extremely important. I would say there are no boilerplate and save all clauses, unlike in a contract, drafting or negotiation. It's exactly for the reason. Why is it important? It's for the reason that you just said. There's a whole amount of research, whole amount of consultation that goes in, and that has to distill itself in this document that you are putting out, either as government or as client or as a professional. And it has to be ticking all the boxes in terms of what the objectives were. It has to be an easy read and an intelligible read. It should not be that you're, as a lawyer, you're only servicing your own community by putting out laws and drafts that only lawyers can understand. So it has to be simple. There's been a good shift, much like as you've seen with social media companies, right? Or the click-through shrink wrap agreements. Now suddenly you're seeing that they've also changed for the better, right? They're telling you things in yes and no, not put out in very deep-seated verbose contracts. I think drafting is extremely important. Having the ability to master English to a great degree in written and spoken form is also very important. And it's almost fundamental because, without those skills, you can be a great researcher. You can be a great public policy thinker. If I can't translate it to the end work product, then it means, absolutely nothing.
Super. So, I mean, just the last thing before this thing, as a partner of PLR, what would be the skills that you would want to see in a CV who is applying to be an associate with you at PLR? What would be the key skills that you would look for in somebody?
What I would look for in a young professional or a law student is very good research skills. whether we like it or not, a decent CGPA, because that validates your ability to have gone through, mountains and mountains of law school curriculum and come out on top. Writing, essentially, so publications and research papers that they would have done are, to me, even better than looking at their credentials in a resume. So that is probably the three subsets, and then obviously we get onto the softer things when something, when the CV or a resume, professional profile ticks those boxes, and we get onto a conversation. Then I obviously look for the inclination of the person in terms of going for public policy, because a lot of times what happens is that it also became the cool new thing to do, and very soon you start realizing that it was not all that you set out to think it was. We're not all Harvey Specters, in that sense. So I would say I would look at research. I would look at the kind of engagements that they have had, both in and outside of law school, in terms of the kind of projects, and above all, some of the research papers and writings and publications.
Super. So, let's just open it up for questions. If somebody wants to ask any questions, please feel free to do that on the chat, and I'll take it up with.
Absolutely, happy to do that.
Okay. Kapil Chawla. Hi. You can now unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Kapil.
Hi. I'm advocate now, practicing now for around 4 years, but I have a background in IT. I've represented India in policy level in APNIC, Asia Pacific Network Information Center. So, and I want to get into policy area, basically in tech startups and IT related things.
Mhm.
So how do I get into in this area? Like I'm still not very well I'm still I would say confused and lost. How do I get into this area?
So thanks for that, Kapil. I think this is a great example of where you have people who have had the right professionals, who have the right technical skill sets, go on to do a law degree, and then try and apply that in the intersection of what they had as a technocrat plus law. I would say, Kapil, you need to just go out and approach the whole host of startups today who are looking at policy advisory, and there's quite a few of them. Happy to take that conversation offline. Since you're in the technology space, a lot of technology associations are also very, very good avenues and a learning curve, which may be a good soft landing pad for someone like yourself. You could look at the IT and ITES manufacturing associations. You could look at software associations. You see some of them in the news all the time. You have India Tech, which is headed by Ramesh Kailasam. You have federations on several sectors. You have federations on everything from drone to I think there's one for the taxi aggregators as well. And these are all areas which require for a bit of technology exposure. There's also Data Security Council of India, which does a whole host of work on policy and engagement. You could end up even prospecting them. I think you just need to focus on your strengths and start out in a place which does exactly what you want to do, right? Which is the intersection of tech and policy, and where it will be appreciated.
Thank you, Aditya. We'll take this offline. Like I've also worked with ACTO and ISPI, like Internet Service Association of India, in the past. But that time I was not a lawyer. But now let's see. Uh, but I'll contact you offline.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to have a question? I think I discussed it all with you, Aditya. So people don't have any more questions, I think. Nonetheless, so any closing thoughts on anything that I missed out on and should be important for the topic too?
Not really. I think we had a fairly exhaustive discussion in terms of coverage. I would be my only recommendation, considering it's LawSeco and you have this expansive network and you're looking at doing consistent courses, is to probably also explore if you could do consistent courses, in the right capsule size for ingestion by the audience. Courses on policy making, on public policy and law, and you get the right set of people to come in and have the pedagogy thrashed out. I think that will be a very, very good tool that will go a long, long way. And who knows, in today's day and age, you may have some of the law schools then approach you for closing out those courses.
Definitely, it makes a lot of sense, and I will take your suggestion forward with the team. And let's see how soon we can build up a course around that. I'm sure this is something interesting and not being worked upon by quite a lot of law schools also. I mean, as it is in the law schools, you hardly get any practical insights or anything. It's just when you go out there for your internships, or maybe as a lawyer, you start practicing, that's where you start gaining some practical momentum and then you build on it. Right.
Yeah.
So we at LawSeco have always tried to inculcate those values right from the beginning to the law students, where they can actually learn all of these skills of drafting, researching, and all these things, so that it builds on a strong foundation. And of course, as you said, public policy and policy research and policy making, all these things should again be theirs to an extent. And I will definitely take it forward with Ramanujan Abhyuday, for that matter, to have something around these lines too.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Same here, same here. It was a great session. Thank you again. And hope to see you soon again for a webinar, maybe. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.